I'm not looking at a tax cut now. We don't need it. We have a strong economy. Certainly a payroll tax cut. President Obama did that in order to artificially jack up the economy. President Obama had zero interest rates. I don't have zero interest. I have real interest rates. And despite that, I have a strong economy.
President Trump shooting down speculation about a temporary payroll tax cut, touting an already strong U.S. economy. Here to talk about it is Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House and a Fox News contributor. Good morning to you, Mr. Speaker. So you look at the president's words here, and he's sort of gone back and forth. And originally, the White House says that they were not considering this payroll tax cut. And they even came on this program, and White House spokesperson said, no, it's not being considered. And then the president the next day said, yeah, we're looking at it. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there about whether or not the president is moving in that direction. But there, clearly, he's trying to calm concerns about a recession.
Well, look, I think that the president wavers in part based on the news media coverage. When there was a effort to sort of panic the economy into recession, the White House went all out, putting Larry Kudlow and others on TV saying, oh, things are fine, don't worry about it. The vice president made a speech, everything's fine. And I think at that point, they looked at what tools do they have if it started to slide into a recession. Now I think they're pretty well convinced that, in fact, we're not going to have a recession in the near future, and they don't need any of those tools. So they're sort of putting them back, holding on to them in case later on in 2020 or 21 or 22, they need to look at them. I also think the president, as a businessman, understands that a very short-term, limited payroll tax cut isn't much of a boost. If you get permanent tax cuts, it's a different thing because it changes your behavior. If you get a very short-term tax cut, frankly, you just go spend it. And we're getting a much bigger boost out of the fall in oil and gas prices, which are the equivalent of a major tax cut in terms of actual spending power, as people can fill up their car for a lot less money than they could 2 or 3 years ago.
And he also continues to call on the Fed to cut interest rates. He's looking for them to cut interest rates several times, even by the end of the year, or at least a couple times. So the Wall Street Journal takes us on in a piece this morning. The editorial board writes, cut the Trump uncertainty tax. Really interesting piece, Mr. Speaker, where it looks at not only the confusion and uncertainty building around whether or not there will be a payroll tax cut, but also takes on the president on the economy, whether or not we often see him touting that it's a strong U.S. economy, but he wants those interest rate cuts. That would indicate that the economy needs those interest rate cuts. But it goes on to say that if the president really wants to give the economy a boost, there's something he can do without Congress, and that is he can cut his trade uncertainty tax. It makes the case that business investment is suffering because no one knows where he's going next with this trade battle, Speaker.
Sure. Well, I mean, look, there's a big difference of opinion about how important it is to deal with China. The president's made a decision that the threat of Chinese dishonesty, the threat of the Chinese stealing intellectual property, the threat of the Chinese setting up a variety of one-way games where they win and we lose, that's a sufficiently big threat that he's willing to take some economic risks to deal with China. Now, there are other folks that don't think China's a problem, and so they would like to use any excuse to get him to back off, which I hope he won't do. On the other front, remember, the part of what's happening worldwide is that the American economy is probably the strongest single economy in the world right now. We have a higher interest rate than, say, Europe does, which means if you're a wealthy person, you're getting out of European bonds, which now pay zero, and you're moving into American bonds. And so, in a sense, we're seeing an artificial strengthening of the dollar because we have a much higher interest rate pattern than Europe does, and the president would like to see the Federal Reserve, kind of bring our interest rates down to be more competitive with European interest rates. And
we've seen the president make that case, and of course that makes our export goods more expensive when we've got that strong U.S. dollar. Meanwhile, moving on to these two Democratic congresswomen, Tlaib and Omar, the president continues his feud with them. He's doubling down even when he said this.
In my opinion, the Democrats have gone very far away from Israel. I cannot understand how they can do that. They don't want to fund Israel. They want to take away foreign aid to Israel. They want to do a lot of bad things for Israel. In my opinion, you vote for a Democrat, you're being very disloyal to Jewish people, and you're being very disloyal to Israel.
Clearly doubling down there. Is this a message the president should stay on, Speaker?
Look, I think the general message is right, but he has a tendency to go about 10% too far. Disloyalty has nothing to do with it. It's a matter of judgment. I think that it's fair to say that the radicals in the Democratic Party stand for the elimination of Israel as a country. And I think that that's going to cause, ultimately, a pretty profound civil war in the Democratic Party. But I get very nervous when we start getting into issues of loyalty and disloyalty. I mean, you can have a sincere, honest disagreement and not have it be an effect of whether or not you're loyal. I do think what the president's saying at a different level, which is these people are really bad for the future of Israel. If you look at what they would do, they basically would eliminate Israel as a country. Now, we can have an honest, straight-up debate about why the Democratic Party is tolerating a group of people who are that deeply anti-Israeli and that deeply anti-Semitic. And I think that's a matter of, it doesn't have to get you into loyalty about America, but it's clearly fair to say these are not people who want to have a sound future for Israel.
All right, I've got 5 seconds left. I know you want people to check out the Moon-Mars project. Speaker, final thoughts on that before we let you go.
Well, I just did a newsletter and I posted it at Fox News. I think we ought to have a prize, and Elon Musk endorsed this idea. I think if we had a prize and put up, say, $2 billion, which is about the cost of one space launch system launch, I think you might see lots of people competing to get to the moon much faster.
A lot of folks talking about that. All right, we'll check it out. Speaker, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
All right.